So, hi everyone, as Ruben said, I'm Liv, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to my presentation on the ongoing journey of my research, looking at Petrie's hoof-prints, charting the influence of William Flinders Petrie on the interpretation of pre-dynastic bovine iconography. And that title might seem a bit of a mouthful, but I promise I'm going to break it down and reveal to you why I think this work is significant and why you should too. And obviously, I'm a first-year PhD student, so please have questions for me. Simpler, the better, because then I might be able to answer them. And also, any feedback would be really appreciated. So the agenda for today is, first, I'm going to share the story behind this research project, how I stumbled upon Petrie and the intriguing world of bovines. Next, I'll provide an overview of what I've done so far. And present a case study that I think really encapsulates some of the issues I've identified. This case study focuses on 2 bovine artifacts from the pre-dynastic period, and I'm examining how Petrie's influence has shaped its interpretation and how this interpretation has evolved over time. And finally, I'll outline my next steps, and I eagerly await your questions and feedback. So, my research aims. So let's delve into the roots of my research. Primarily, my current research is inspired by my master's dissertation, which was titled Constructing Egypt, a study of the effect of 19th and 20th century worldviews on the interpretation of bovine iconography from pre-dynastic Egypt. And in that project, I examined how past worldviews continue to shape our understanding of ancient Egyptian material culture, particularly that of bovine-related material. In this way, I was inspired by Elliot Collar's Conflicted Antiquities and Alice Stevenson's Scattered Finds, both of which work to dissect the influence of contemporary worldviews on the material culture of ancient Egypt. Unsurprisingly, in the course of my research, I discovered that our perceptions of ancient Egypt through the interpretation of material culture have been repeatedly constructed, deconstructed, reconstructed. And to serve the contemporary worldviews of individuals, social groups, as well as the prevailing scholarly trends of the era. This realization underscores the importance of my research in challenging and reshaping these perceptions. Such ideas rooted in the 19th and 20th centuries still hold sway in Egyptology, particularly in bovine studies. Within my master's research, I also identified several troubling issues within museum collections, stemming from the historical baggage of the turn of the century. These issues can be split into 3 major sections. The first is museum collections that still use the same interpretation established by the initial excavator over 100 years prior, which some cases might be perfectly fine. In most cases, it probably isn't. Secondly, there's a considerable disparity in the identification of bovine material across different museum collections and even within the same museum. And finally, a real lack of understanding of specific bovine-related terms and their current usage. With these insights in mind, I wanted to explore not only the broader impact of past attitudes on our understanding, but also the specific influence of individuals, such as Petrie, on the field. Could we trace their footprints, or rather their hoof-prints, through history? So, why Flinders Petrie? I'd like to share with you why I've chosen to focus on him. In the vast landscape of Egyptology, certain figures loom large. Belzoni, Carter, and more recently, Zahiawas. They've shaped the discourse of our field. However, it is Petrie alone who is hailed as the father of archaeology, or Egyptian archaeology. He occupies a unique position in history. He straddles the nexus of the 19th and 20th centuries, and he dedicated much of his life of work to his work in Egypt and Palestine. He led 38 excavations, which is a hell of a lot, and his contribution to the field are unparalleled. His pioneering work in sequence dating revolutionized archaeological methodology. By grouping pottery fragments based on similar characteristics, Petrie devised a method for establishing relative chronologies, a breakthrough that remains essential to our understanding of the pre-dynastic period. Thanks to his meticulous research at sites like Nakada, Nakada has become synonymous with pre-dynastic studies. Petrie, the individual, is also a really interesting character. He was completely obsessive about his work, and this little quote here, which is in a letter he sent to his friend, kind of makes me laugh. And it says, "I abhor all ceremonies and festivities and all concourses of people. I want to be doing instead of being and suffering. I'd rather do a week's hard work than assist in a day's pleasure." And he was my age when he wrote that, so he was like 26. And it just makes me laugh how strange he was. But these factors, Petrie's pivotal role in Egyptian archaeology, his development of innovative methodologies, and steadfast dedication make him an ideal subject for my research. By examining his influence on a specific subset of material culture, the world of bovine iconography, I aim to uncover how individuals shape our understanding of ancient civilizations like Egypt. So, why the bovine? I've chosen to look at the bovine. It's been a specific interest of mine. I love cattle. This is a picture of me with Ozzy the bull in Birmingham, and it's something that stayed with me since I did my undergraduate dissertation at this university. Cattle were an invaluable economic resource, both in life and death. They could be used as beasts of burden to plough fields. They provided sustenance through their meat and through milk. Their utility was indispensable for the people of ancient Egypt. Even after death, their hides could be used for clothing and their horns could be used as tools. They also served as spiritual repositories, revered for their role in religious rituals and offerings. And finally, they represented various symbolic archetypes. You've got the bull's potent virility, you've got the mothering cow. In my opinion, the bovine is an informative case study to explore the influence of individuals like Petrie. The wealth of evidence available provides a fertile ground for investigation, allowing us to trace the footprints of influential figures throughout history. So, my work so far. Now that I've outlined the framework of my research and provided some insight into the motivations behind my choices, I'd like to share with you the methodology I've employed to investigate Petrie's influence on bovine iconography and how I've organised my data. It's not as good as Sam's, but whose is? The first thing I did was I identified each pre-dynastic site in Egypt where Petrie was involved, and there was a lot. Then, working through the published excavation reports of each of these sites, I have identified the bovine-related material, and finally, I've created a database to catalogue these artefacts. So I've just got an example here. And this is obviously in an Excel spreadsheet, but I didn't want to show that because it's a bit of a mess. But these are the sort of information that I'm recording. So I've got object type, excavation site, original report, publication, etc. I've also added comparisons of Petrie's initial interpretation to the museum interpretation or description, and in some cases where there's been a subsequent supplement. And this really highlights some of the issues I went through earlier in relation to terminology and identification. And I've just got a little example of one that I've done. So we've got an ivory hairpin from Nakada. That's where it first comes up. It's excavated by Petrie. It's from this tomb. It's on that plate. It's in a cemetery. The original said it was a hairpin. They said it was a hairpin. But interestingly, they've said it's got a horns on top. Petrie didn't say that. Wonder why. I'll come back to that. It's in the Ashmolean. The museum gets rid of the horns bit just as it's a hairpin. That's its museum number, its measurements, and the link if you're interested. So, I've also been exploring Petrie's sphere, or what I like to call Petrie's sphere of influence. This aspect of my research delves into the social and scholarly networks that Petrie navigated, exploring both the individuals he influenced and those who in turn influenced him. This investigation is crucial as it allows me to map out Petrie's impact not only on individual scholars, but also on broader scholarly trends and ideologies. One of the pivotal revelations I've made so far is the extent of Petrie's association with the eugenics movement and prominent eugenicists Francis Galton and Carl Pearson. So it's a nice little picture of them together there. That's Francis Galton and Pearson's on the other side. Petrie and Pearson, in particular, shared a really close relationship. They were actually next-door neighbours, but they were also fellow professors at UCL. According to Petrie's biographer, Dower, they developed a long-standing friendship. And it was actually Galton who gave Petrie his first paid assignment in Egypt in 1886, commissioning him to photograph the different racial types portrayed in ancient portraits, sculptures, and temple inscriptions of Egypt. In 1887, Petrie published Racial Photographs of the Egyptian Monuments, a series of 190 photographs of the various races conquered or visited by the Egyptians. This work not only promoted eugenic theories of ethnic physiognomies, but also contributed to the legitimization of eugenic ideologies in Egyptological circles. Moreover, Petrie's involvement in eugenics extended beyond just photography. He supplied a significant volume of human remains from his excavations to the Eugenics Records Office for measurements and classifications. This practice reinforced eugenic theories through empirical data. By examining Petrie's engagement with eugenic discourse, I want to uncover how these ideas permeated his archaeological practices and interpretations. I hope to uncover additional layers of influence that shaped his work by tracing Petrie's connections to other scholars and social groups. So now, I've got a bit of a case study. And this focuses on two bovine artifacts from the pre-dynastic site of Nakada. And I believe they perfectly demonstrate how Petrie's influence has shaped their interpretation and how this interpretation has evolved over time. The site of Nakada is often characterized as the most important pre-dynastic site in Upper Egypt. It's just there on the map. It's located around 18 miles north of Luxor and is primarily made up of a pre-dynastic settlement of Southtown and several large cemeteries, dating in age from Nakada I to Nakada III. And it was first excavated by Jacques de Morgan and subsequently by Petrie and Quebel in 1894. Following his excavations at Nakada, Petrie determined that due to the inclusion of irregular pottery types and unusual body positions, that the population buried there belonged to a new race. Petrie developed the term new race to refer to the non-Egyptian remains of an invading people or foreigners. He suggested that in every possible detail of arrangement and object, there is not one common point of similarity between the Egyptians and the new race, and no connection with Egypt would have been suspected if the cemeteries had been found in any other country. He used eugenic theory to suggest new race skulls were a marked type with massive brows, deep cut bridge to the nose, and a short but very prominent nose. And in his opinion, clearly un-Egyptian in origin. He sent these remains, as he did countless others, to Carl Pearson at UCL, where he plotted the cranial measurements and determined that the numbers correlated with skull measurements of modern Parisians, German Bavarian peasants, and Libyans. However, despite Petrie's claims, he was soon disproved by Jacques de Morgan, who correctly identified the material from Nakada as being pre-dynastic and very much Egyptian in origin. So we're going to look at grave 1788. At Nakada, Petrie excavated this particular tomb. He recorded in his excavation report the following items: 3 ivory hairpins, an emery plummet, which who knows what that means, a cup-shaped iron concretion, and 1 ivory carving. As you can see in the table, I've also included the record provided in the 1970 supplement to that excavation. In their supplement, they recorded beads of crystal, agate, and carnelian, ivory hairpins again, an emery plummet again, a wig fragment, and 2 ivory cow heads, amulets. So we've gone from an ivory carving to an ivory amulet. Keep that in your heads. Finally, I've managed to track down most of these, for the most part, in their current collections and included the museum descriptions. So we can see that the emery plummet has now become a plumb bob of fine sandstone. Still don't really know what that means. But, and we've still got the hairpins, but we've lost a few, and the beads have sort of just become beads, and we don't know what kind they are. But interestingly, if you look at the bottom two, we've now got a pendant and an amulet of a bull's head. So, for the sake of my research, I'm primarily interested in the bottom 2 items. In the original excavation report, Petrie records one ivory carving in plate LXI. The only description he offers is that it is a strange, inexplicable object, which does not appear to be an ornament, nor has any use been suggested for it. Now you can see there's, well, 3 items, but 2 items on screen. And that is because in the supplement, we have 2 ivory amulet cow heads being present in grave 1788, as seen in the table on the previous slide. One of these can be found at UCL, which is the top one, and the other at the Ashmolean, which is this one. And if you're thinking, Liv, that's quite clearly upside down, it will come into it, don't worry. So it's not clear which item is depicted in the original excavation report. UCL seem to think that theirs is, but I would say it isn't, and I would say it's more likely that the Ashmolean's version is. But if you disagree, please tell me, and I might change my mind. And why Petrie didn't mention that there was 2, and he just recorded 1, we do not know. The third layer to this is the museum, went a bit too quick there, is the museum description, which changes the identification again. We now have, rather than 2 cow amulet heads, we'd have a pendant, which doesn't really say much, and a bull amulet. And actually, in the Ashmolean collections online, this is how it's shown. It's shown upside down. So I've turned it around for you so you can see it properly. So why is there all this confusion? What are these things? Why does everybody say it's a different thing? I'll come to it. Oh. Why? The discrepancies in the interpretation and identification of the artefacts from grave 1788 typify, in my opinion, the complexities of my research. Initially, Petrie and Gabel's excavation report from 1896 recorded a complete absence of amulets or charms at the site of Nakada. This absence was attributed to Petrie's new race theory, which argued that the burials were of un-Egyptian origin. However, as archaeological perspectives changed, in the supplement in 1970, they identified a variety of amulets that had previously gone unrecorded. This shift in interpretation of the same material highlights the importance of re-evaluating past assumptions in light of new evidence. Another contributing factor to this discrepancy lies in the realm of terminology. While the distinction between a bull and a cow might seem inconsequential, the choice of words can significantly impact our understanding of ancient artifacts. Clear and precise terminology is essential for accurately categorizing and interpreting archaeological finds. Yet inconsistency in terminology can lead to confusion and misinterpretation. So you might think, Liv, who cares? Cow is a cow, a bull is a bull. Well, you might not know this, but a cow is only a cow because it's had a calf. If you have a female cow and it hasn't had a calf, it's called a heifer. An oxen is a castrated bull or a castrated male, and that would be more likely to be used for as beasts of burden in agriculture, whereas a bull is more likely to be used in sort of sacrificial offerings. So all of these things matter, words matter, basically, and interpretations of cows, bulls, calves, oxen matter. Furthermore, this issue is often compounded by museum collections practices, which in my experience often perpetuate outdated or unsupported identifications of artefacts. When museums fail to update their records or rely on questionable attributions, researchers are left with inaccurate information, which ultimately hinders all of our abilities to access and study these objects effectively. You can imagine for me, I'm interested in the bovine, so what do I have to search? I have to search bovine, bull, cow, cattle, oxen, heifer, and see who, just because somebody who was inputting the information online, which is obviously a really important thing to do, has decided on a whim to say whatever they think it might be, without actually any evidence behind that assumption. So, in conclusion, I hope you found this journey into Petrie's hoof-prints interesting and informative. By tracing Petrie's footsteps and examining his sphere of influence, we have identified the deep connections between Egyptology and broader intellectual currents, including his troubling entanglement with eugenic ideologies. Through a detailed case study of artefacts from the Nakada site, we've also illustrated the challenges and nuances of this entanglement. As I continue my research, I hope to continue to uncover the intricate web of influences that can shape our understanding of ancient Egypt, as well as the enduring legacy of individuals like Petrie. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Liv, for the amazing talk on bovines and Flinders Petrie's influence on them. Does anyone have any questions in the room?
Liv, that was incredible. Thank you so much. I'm going to go through my catalogue because I have cows in some of my models and I've labelled them all as bovine, but I'm now going to go back and look at them in more detail as well.
It's a really interesting thing. I didn't detail it in this presentation, but I've also looked at models, mainly clay models. And a lot of the times they'll say in collections, oh, this is a cow. And with no sort of evidence behind that. But interesting, I do know that the Egyptians would craft udders. And that's a really good way of seeing if it's a cow or a bull, because a lot of the times the horns will have fallen off in that time. But yeah, it's a really interesting avenue to look at models as well, which I intend to do. But yeah.
I think Sam's got another one.
Sorry, the question I was going to ask before I got distracted by models. I feel your pain on the terminology because I have to search for figure, figurine, statue, statuette, model, servant. And yeah, it's painful. Are you going to contact the organisations that hold these things and help address the terminology they're using? Is this something that's going to be publicly available to help future people? Because I know the pain, and sometimes the museums are really grateful. They haven't got the expertise to do these things. So it would be a really useful exercise if this was publicly available.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I suppose I assumed that they probably wouldn't care, but yeah, that would be great, and I would definitely do that. And you'd be surprised at how many sort of discrepancies there are. But yeah, that would be great. That would be a great thing to do, like at the end, definitely.
Oh, many questions. We will move along.
Thank you so much for your talk. A bit of a more general question about bovines. Is there much of a distinction between wild species? Are there wild species of bovine at the time versus domesticated species? How different are they? Did the Egyptians conceptualize them differently, portray them differently? Can we tell if with the material culture, what's kind of, does the material culture come from a domestic or a wild species?
May I add to that, because I have like a similar species question. I was just going to ask, I don't know whether in the terminology or in the objects themselves, there's any difference between like longhorn or shorthorn cattle. Oh, cool.
Those are really good questions, and yes. So obviously I'm dealing with pre-dynastic material, for which we don't have sort of a lot of, written material. We don't have any. But in later dynastic periods, we have specific terms for short-horned cattle, long-horned cattle, humped cattle, no-horned cattle, and they all occupy different, or are believed to sort of occupy different roles. Some are used for sacrificial purposes, some are used in agricultural purposes, etc. In terms of wild versus domesticated, that was when I did my undergraduate dissertation. I did quite a bit of work on that. And you'll find in descriptions of the pharaoh, he's referred to as a wild bull. He's a powerful wild bull because they are seen to be stronger. Obviously, in the domesticated setting, you wouldn't have a field of bulls because that would be useless to you. In agriculture, you'd have one bull, you'd castrate the rest. You have oxen. Oxen are actually bulk up more than bulls because they've been castrated, so they're better to use for beasts of burden. So really in the sort of domesticated setting, you're generally dealing with oxen, but in the wild sort of undomesticated, you're generally dealing with bulls. But that's a big generalization, but I hope that answers your question. In terms of identification, it's really hard. And it takes a bit of sort of comparing it to other items to sort of figure that out. And pottery carvings or pottery scratchings make it a bit easier to sort of determine it. You have things, I could go on forever. You also have these things called wild bull hunts, which are like a very kingly activity, sort of a link to that like Neo-Assyrian lion hunts. That's another sort of important thing for the king to do. But yeah, there's loads of things. I have got a bibliography if you're interested in sort of cattle more generally as well after this slide.
We'll go to what we might do is we might get both questions and then go from there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you said obviously about the issues with like Petrie's work and the need to sort of reevaluate past work. I was wondering, like, how much work have you found that's actually doing that? And like, what are they just approaching similar, like the eugenic side of things, or have they uncovered other issues that they're also approaching?
And my question was to do with why you chose the pre-dynastic, because I personally find that it's criminally understudied compared to many dynastic periods. So I was wondering what drew you to bovine iconography in that period in general.
Thank you. In terms of the first question, more recently there's been a lot of redress to Petrie's work. You'll find a lot of material which sort of works to deconstruct his interpretations. Not on bovines, as far as I'm aware. If someone knows a work that does that, then please tell me, but not as far as I know on bovines. In terms of eugenics, you're looking at a lot of human remains, not so much looking at how having those eugenic ideologies can then affect the interpretation of non-human remains or of material culture in general. I think that answers that question. Yes. And then the pre-dynastic. I love the pre-dynastic period. It's my favourite. I like pharaohs, but they're a bit boring and everybody does them. And there's too much information about them. I like the things where there's no information because then you can sort of go wild with it and, you know, come up with all the sort of theories, obviously backed by evidence eventually. But, you know, I just find it as a really interesting avenue. And also the bovine in that period is a really important symbol. You'll see it crops up again and again in models, on pottery. You even have rock carvings, which are obviously hard to date, but believed to be from the pre-dynastic period. And yeah, I just find it a really fascinating time for the bovine. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Fantastic.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. Just before my question, like a little note, like when you showed one, like your case study first, I thought it was an elephant with the tusk. I don't know if it's just me. So, okay. Yeah, right. Otherwise, I had more question about the methods and like methodology for your PhD, because obviously, I guess there will be a lot of material. Do you think you would look at a particular site, or are you taking a particular typology, like a, like specific object, or yeah, how do you think you'll go for that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In terms of thinking that it's an elephant, that's a completely reasonable theory to have. That's actually in a publication by Petrie later on, once he acknowledges the fact that these are amulets and they are Egyptian, he says that they're actually ram's heads. That's his sort of analysis of them. And then they go to cows and then they go to bulls. But yeah, elephant, that's completely reasonable. I'm obviously always thinking about the bovine, but it's up to you. And then in terms of how my sort of plan is for my data is that I have this obviously huge database where I'm looking at all of this material. And at the moment, I'm sort of thinking I will probably pick out, I'm not sure how many, but I'll pick out case studies that I feel like sort of a bit like this one, which sort of go through all of those issues. Because obviously you've got issues here with bad recording initially by Petrie. You've got issues of eugenics influencing interpretation, and then you've got the issue of the museum collections at the end. So I would intend to sort of identify case studies as I go along. That might change. But yeah, that's the idea at the moment. So yeah, I think that's what I'll do.
Fantastic. Any other questions? If there's not, I do have a question. In terms of, I guess, the material that you've uncovered so far and compiled into the database, what is the distribution you're looking at in terms of like the partage of the materials between museums here in the UK, museums in Egypt, potentially museums in other contexts as well?
That's a really good question. Oh, sorry, that's a bit loud. Actually, a load of material is at UCL. It's all at the Petrie Museum of Archaeology. That is where a lot of the material is. And then there's a lot of material at the Ashmolean. The British Museum has some material, but actually Petrie didn't like the British Museum, and he didn't like to send them things. So he sent a lot of things to the Ashmolean and UCL, obviously. There's going to be things in places that I won't find, like Sam said. If it's just listed, like for the Ashmolean, that's just listed as a pendant, how would I find that if I didn't already know it was there and I'd gone through the excavation reports and then the supplement and then found the museum? It's difficult. It's a difficult thing to find. But yeah, I would say primarily UCL has so much from those pre-dynastic sites. But yeah, it's hard.
Thank you. Any final questions?
Thanks for your talk. It was really fascinating. I'm a curator, so do you have any like discussions with curators about use of terminologies and like what Sam said about changing that interpretation? I mean, it's quite hard for like labels because the average museum visitor doesn't read a label, and there's like there's reading ability ages that you have to follow, but for the research online, it's really quite interesting to have those discussions with curators. So yeah, I just wonder if you're going to have that in your dissertation.
I would really love to. I suppose at the moment I'm still of sort of the mindset of like what do I know? Museums know everything. I'm an idiot. I don't know anything. How, like, this is just an idea, sort of. But I think maybe as my confidence grows, as I move on in my studies, hopefully I'll be able to go to music. But that is something I intend to do, is to sort of say, hey, guys, like, I don't think this is right. Or you've got items from the same grave, which are very similar in appearance, but you've called them different things. Maybe you might need to do a bit of a conflab. But yeah, I think it's more, at the moment, it's probably a bit more of a confidence thing of like, I don't want to say anything to anybody, but I think eventually I will get to that stage and hopefully be able to, you know, speak to museums and sort of help the future researcher sort of find bovine material when they want to.
Fantastic. What we might do is we might go over to the online questions, because I think some have come through.
Yeah, we have one question. First of all, Liv, it was amazing. Thank you so much. And there's plenty of enthusiastic comments. So I really hope that they will help you grow your confidence, as you said. But there's also a question, which is, what do you think of Petrie's dynastic race theory?
Well, not a fan. Basically, Petrie thought that it's all down to those sort of racist colonial ideas that we all know about from this period. And I'm just explaining this for anybody who doesn't know, and the idea that the pharaohs, they weren't actually Egyptian, they came from white places, and they were white people. And it's ludicrous and bizarre, but it's really, but at the same time, it shouldn't be discounted offhand, because it's those ideas which then informed the material, like the interpretation of the material, which we are still using those interpretations. So we need to look at those interpretations. Why did he say what they were? And trace it back to those theories like dynastic race. And that's really the major point of my research, is to think we should, even though we know that he's wrong, or maybe some people think he's right, I don't know. Most people, logical people, know that he's wrong, that then we don't then just leave it at that and say, oh yeah, he was wrong about that, but everything else was all right. We think, actually, no, we know he's wrong about that, so what else is he wrong about? But also, I want to make it clear, I like Petrie. I think he's all right. He's a, you know, I don't agree with all the things he said, but he obviously worked very hard. So yeah, just so nobody thinks. And also, I love museums, and I don't want to make people think that I hate museums and I think they're awful, because they're great. And collections online are absolutely fantastic, especially for me, because I struggle socially to get out to museums, you know, and so having those collections online is just amazing. But there are just, you know, room for improvement.
Thank you. Thank you so much.